So, so the whole protest that was today was it's the 50-51, and the whole idea behind this protest is there are 50 states that are having 50 protests on the same day with one unified voice, and ultimately everyone that is coming out speaking out against obviously Elon Musk and the things that he's doing, but largely the sentiment around this is the I think it's the Freedom Foundation's Project 2025. And the understanding that this was out there and it was distanced during the lead up to the election. And now that there has been confirmation, there's not as much distance. And it does look like a lot of things are getting checked off on this list. So very clearly, there's a lot of people that are upset about it. There are a lot of people that are upset with Elon Musk doing what he's doing with many, many government agencies right now. And this is a protest that I found out about and just wanted to join. So I'm literally there, one in support because, like, it is ultimately my views. I'm not a fan of what's going on right now. But I want to take pictures. That's really the thing. I love going to events like this. I think that there's a really good human element that you can share with people and you can really see some interesting moments. So I also am aware that there's a lot of people that don't necessarily want themselves to be seen because of any number of reasons. There's a lot of federal employees that aren't allowed to protest and they're not allowed to speak out at these things. And if their faces were to be seen on any pictures, that could be troublesome for them. Um, it's a public space though. And at the end of the day, it's a public space and I've got a camera. So I'm at the top of these stairs, and so you've got all the stairway going up to the Capitol, and in the middle of the stair is the speakers, and then everyone is at the base of the stairs watching the speakers. There's a lot of people. There's a good couple hundred people, and I'm at the top, kind of hanging out by where the cops are posted up. And just getting some really, really good shots of signs and people's reactions to what's going on. And there's this girl who like is making eye contact with me in the crowd. And I'm thinking like, okay, like she's very clearly trying to like get my attention through contact. But at the same time, it's hard to tell because she's got these giant glasses, a huge mask, a giant hood. She's covering her entire identity, and she doesn't want her identity to be known. So she starts walking up to me as I'm taking pictures, and she goes up the entire stairway behind the speaker to come up to me. And she's like, "Are you taking pictures?" It's like, I have this gigantic camera. What else would I be doing? Uh, so she's like, "Well, are you taking pictures of people?" It's like, yeah, it's a protest. There's people at a protest. She's like, well, it needs to be brought up that there's a lot of concern about doxing. What are you doing with these pictures? It's like, oh, I'm gonna post them on Reddit. She's like, well, who are you here with? I was like, myself. Well, you should be concerned about other people's doxing. I was like, well, no, they had just as much ability to do the exact same thing that you did. You're concerned about your identity and you actually did something about it. And it's public space. I'm free to take pictures. She says, well, there are a lot of people that are very concerned about this. It's like, I appreciate that, but what we're all here for is the concern of our rights being taken away. So I'm certainly not going to let you take away mine. Have a good day. Um, and that's the kind of mentality that I have at these protests. So I don't really make a whole lot of friends. But so there's this guy that I was telling you about, and you've got a lot of very, very, very left-leaning people that are really, really passionate. And then there's this one guy who is just Idaho through the teeth. And he's open carrying on the side. He's got his American flag, and he's very clearly the odd duck of the group. And yet he's just going up and making really, really civil conversations with people. And he's simply asking, hey, what's your sign about? What's your view on this? Can you tell me more information about it? And he's not being judgmental, but I started talking to the guy after this whole situation and realizing what he's doing. And he's like, yeah, I usually come out to stuff like this. A lot of the times I'll just come out with my revolutionary or my Civil War musket. And it's a talking point, and I'm trying to get conversations out of people. And I kind of smiled. I was like, you're an instigator. You're totally doing this on purpose. And I recognized that immediately. He's like, yeah, like that's the whole point is you got to get people kind of shook up a little bit to be able to get them to have a conversation if you want to have a real conversation with somebody. Um, and the whole hilarious thing for me is even though he and I disagreed on a lot of things, we got to a point where I could simply say, yeah, I get it. I don't agree with you. And then the conversation continued. And I got that with someone across the aisle. And the people that were there on my side, none of them were willing to do that. In fact, they were coming up against me because they thought that I was against them. So yeah, America's in a wonderful place, isn't it?
There's a so was how was the protest? Mostly peaceful. Was it just speakers? Was it?
It was mostly speakers. I kind of have a thought on this one specifically. I would say it's a fair assessment that a lot of America is kind of going through the grieving process. They're mourning the loss of their daily interactions that they were used to. I actually called cousin Erica earlier today, and we were talking about what I think is really interesting about Trump, and specifically the second term and everything that's going on is for the millennial generation, we're really, really used to, we grew up with Clinton, and Clinton didn't really cross any lines that were big lines until the affair. That was a big line, but it wasn't like a political line, it was a personal line, and it was enough before social media and the internet that it didn't explode into something that was very damning for him, and it didn't really change the opinions of young people that weren't really paying attention. I think the fact that you had me paying attention to the Clinton deposition when I was 10 is a little bit of an outlier for people my age. Um, but then we have Bush, and Bush never really crossed a line because we all agreed with what he did because the country was all on the same page. Go out and do it. Obama didn't cross the line in a way that we would see. Nobody was talking about how many drone strikes he was authorizing, but like because he did that dance so well, we felt like he was still within the line. And the first Trump administration was kind of you're a bit of a bumbling, you don't really know what you're doing. So I think that you're just an idiot. I don't necessarily think that you're crossing any lines. I just think that you're incompetent. Um, and then you get Biden, and it's like you didn't cross any lines because you don't have the cognitive ability to cross a line. But now, for the first time in our life, we're willing to see somebody go all the way up to the line and tell someone, I am going to do this. And it brings an argument that I've made in the past of why does California have the death penalty if they don't use it? And the debate on the death penalty can be a separate conversation, but if you're gonna have it and you don't enforce it, it's not a deterrent. It is just it's placating. Um, and if Trump is going to threaten something and he doesn't fulfill that threat, what's the point of the threat? And I think that for our generation, this is one of the first times that we're actually seeing leadership be able to go past that line that we've kind of set. And with this administration coming in, that line is getting crossed in a lot of ways. So I think that America is in a real sense of mourning of that sense of normalcy. And because of the grieving process, um, I do think that there are people that need to come together and know that they're not alone. Because if you're just completely surrounded with your losses, if you're only paying attention to the news that this is happening and this is happening and you hate this, but this is happening next, you're just going to get defeated constantly. So I think that that was the first thing about the protest, is really letting people know that they're not alone and that they have a community. But the second thing that I really think that this was doing, and one of the speakers was really talking about, is, man, did the Democrats fuck themselves this year. Uh, they didn't do them any service by not holding primaries. That's what lost me. I am now nomad without party because they got rid of my selection. And the Democrats recognize that. And I think that they need to rally before the midterms. And by having a protest in all 50 states, all at the same time, with one unified message early on in the administration, yeah, there's going to be people that peter off, but the people that are really, really, really passionate about this are going to be the ones going for those local representative roles. And maybe you might see some people running for Senate or any number of things. But I think that this is the Democrat Party rallying. So that way, when we get to the midterms, we're not caught with our pants down and we might actually have an option to be able to go against this. Because as it looks like right now, there's not much of a plan to fight the reality that we lost the fight and now they get to do what they want to do because that's what winners get to do. Say that I cut out. Are you on mute?
I was on mute because my dog was barking.
See, this is eventually going to happen in this podcast. This is where the millennial baby boomer part's going to be fun.
The but I thought it was interesting that you mentioned Project 2025, because I think it's uh, illustrative of what you were talking about. There's one of the challenges. It'll be interesting to see if this protest gets like any coverage in the media at all. I was on X
Yeah.
earlier today, and I didn't see a single word about any kind of a unified protest that was going around across the country. You're the only person who's spoken to me about it. I just haven't heard another single word. And uh, I think there's therapists talk a lot about catastrophizing, and catastrophizing is when you
Mine does.
yeah, it's when you take a
Worst case scenario.
and everything is always the worst case scenario. And that's kind of what I think Project 2025 is. Um, and I don't know what the purpose behind it was, but during the campaign, Trump was like, "Look, I don't know what you're talking about. I know that there's all kinds of people who write things, but I haven't even seen the plan." And if you went to his campaign website, he had an issues page where he made a video of himself talking about the issues that he exactly what he's doing right now. He made videos about it, and they were right there on his website for anybody to see. And throughout the campaign, everybody was talking about this Project 2025, and nobody was talking about what he actually said he was going to do and published on his own website. Um,
And to
so
the credit, that's one of the reasons why I've been going to whitehouse.gov to learn about the executive actions instead of going to any news sites. I want to be able to read the whole thing without somebody giving me their opinion. And they're doing a really good job of putting things that I don't like in full transparency for me to read.
yeah, and the thought process behind those executive actions are there's so he's updated his website, and now he's got a 20-point plan for how he plans on running the second administration. And then And then he's got a whole
Is this on
nother
his
document
personal website?
on his campaign, donaldjtrump.com. Um,
Okay.
and it's like the platform, and then there's so he's and it's right there for the whole world to see, in terms of what his priorities are. And then there's more specifics in there's a document that you can link to from there, and it's a PDF that explains his entire platform. So there's a I kind of agree. Well, I don't kind of agree. I very much agree with you that this is the first time for people in generations X and millennial to see this kind of leadership, because this is exactly what Ronald Reagan was doing. Um, and one of the reasons that we were so successful in the Cold War, there was a lot of people that were involved in that, but Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II were probably the two most instrumental figures in the Western victory of the Cold War. Um, but and one of the reasons Ronald Reagan was so effective is because people knew that he meant what he said, and if he said he was going to do something, that's what he was going to do. And that's again, there's like I think maybe last time I think we talked a little bit about it, but I'm not a fan of um, Elon Musk in a governmental role. The way that
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a couple, problems with it. Um, uh, the like for SpaceX, he got a security clearance, but he wasn't given uh, SCI access to the program. So he was literally putting boxes onto rockets and sending them into space, but he had absolutely no idea what was in the box, where it was going, and there were people in SpaceX that knew exactly where those that cargo was going to go and where it was going to be placed into orbit, because obviously they had to know that in order to put it in the right place, right? But
Right.
but he wasn't one of those people. Um, and it may be because he just didn't really have a need to know. He's the CEO. He's not like steering the rocket. He's not part of the team that actually, you know, decides
He's
how
not
long this.
physically touching it.
Yeah, he's just not there's he's in a completely different role. So you could argue that they just denied that access because he didn't have a need to know. But another way of looking at it is he's very much a globalist. I mean, he was born in South Africa. He moved from South Africa to Canada, went to university in Canada for a couple years, then moved to the United States. Um, and he's built some great he's done some really fantastic stuff. He's built some great companies. Um, uh, but his largest manufacturing plant for Tesla is not in the United States, it's in China. And he's got a huge Tesla, they call them gigafactory. He's got a huge factory
Yep.
in Germany. So he's very much a globalist. And he sees um, the world through a globalist's eye. And that means that no nation is better than any other nation. No nation's priorities are placed in front of another nation's. And that is in conflict with Donald
National
Trump's.
security.
Yeah, it's in contrast with what Donald Trump says he's going to do, and what he has demonstrated that he plans to do. Um, so I think that Musk has some really uncomfortable ties with China, and because he's got ties with China, he's got ties with the Chinese Communist Party. There's just no way to do business at the level that he's doing it in China without also working with senior members of that party. But so I've got problems with that. And then the other piece of it is, there's at least the six folks that are have been publicly identified as being, his part of his Doge team.
The
They,
the very, very, very young folks.
yeah. So, so there's so the people he's got working for him are ideologues who have absolutely no experience in how ideology plays itself out in practice. That's
I
one of the
had
reasons.
oh, go ahead, sorry.
There's That's one of the reasons why you see people who start out life very very young being progressive, but then as they get older, they're like, wait a minute, uh, now they're taking taxes from me. Now they're taking, property rights from me. Now they're taking freedom of speech from me. So they end up becoming more and more conservative as they see how institutions play out in reality. So, yeah, I've just got real concerns with, but there's the bottom line is Musk has won the confidence of the president of the United States. Um, and at least for the foreseeable future, he's got a very, very large operating space with tremendous power in that space.
Um, One of the last clients that I had yesterday at the shop is this young guy. He's a freshman in college. I've been cutting his hair for years, and he is kind of the stereotypical Joe Bro college kid. And he pays attention, but he definitely listens to a narrative. And most of the things that I hear him talk about whenever I'm asking him questions are, well, you can't have a country if you don't have borders. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's a very valid statement, but that's also kind of a surface level thought that's not it's not fleshed out. And that's if that's the thing that you're going on, and that's the thing that he's defending, and that's the thing that you actually care about, I can get it. And he goes into the Lake and Riley Act, and I'm like, yeah, I understand that, and I'm not disagreeing with you. If that's the hill that you're on, I understand it. Tell me how you feel about Elon. So we start talking about the whole Doge and the whole the movement of changes, and it was interesting because that's the first time that he was ever uh, hesitant towards anything that's going on in the administration. And I asked him specifically, how do you feel with the people that are making these changes being your age with your education level? And I'm asking him this question, and then my next client is walking in, and he's literally going to hear this kid's answer. And the next guy is someone I've known for years. Definitely, he and I are pretty aligned. And kid's about to leave, and he's like, well, here's the thing. Young people have a lot of really good ideas. I was like, you are correct. I will absolutely agree with you. Young people have really good ideas. You have a great day. I'll see you next time you're in. And he leaves on young people have really good ideas, which I think was a really good way to leave. And and my next client, without missing a beat, as soon as the door closes, yeah, but they don't have the experience of knowing when they fucked up. So that's the reason that you want to have some kind of establishment, not necessarily because of the ideas that they're having, but understanding the ramifications of how many mistakes you've gone through. And it comes back to the whole light bulb. Do you know how to make a light bulb? No, but I know 10,000 ways of not doing that.
Yeah,
And I to a certain extent can understand why Elon would hire people like that, because yeah, you're just as much of a narcissist as the other guy. So of course you're going to have a bunch of young people that want to cling to this guy that they idolize and get to work immediately underneath. And then on top of that, if you have the vast majority of these processes being done by artificial intelligence, who better to program it than the kids that are in school doing the programming that won't ask any questions whatsoever and will just let the AI do what the AI does? So to a certain extent, I get it because these young people are a non-issue because they're just simply the pen stroke of the guy.
Yeah, and Musk has his own AI company, and see, I think I look at Doge in that there's two possible outcomes for Doge. Either Doge initiates um, a much needed and very beneficial transformation about in the way that America executes governance, and we might have a much leaner government. We have a government that's focused um, on the specific things that the federal government can do very well, and leaves the things up to the states and the various localities to take care of. So that's one possible outcome. The other possible outcome is it ends up being the greatest betrayal of trust in the history of the United States. Um,
See, and that's one of the things that I'm more concerned about. And one of the people that I talked to at the protest today was a worker for the Forest Service. So she's a federal worker. And she and I had probably the best conversation because of all of the issues that I worry about. I think the energy crisis and public lands are the two things that I personally care the most about. Like with as much as I went out camping in national forest space, the concept of that becoming privatized so that way we can have more development for residential areas and new neighborhoods. I think that that's a slap in the face to Theodore Roosevelt. And I also think that that prevents the next generation from being able to have a truly spiritual experience. And I worry more about that as technology gets even better and better, because some sentiments that I've heard from young people when they come into the barber shop is the most beautiful thing that I've seen is on a PlayStation. The graphics that render are so amazing. And there's been this big generational shift of consuming and ease and comfort and convenience. And people aren't willing to go out into nature anymore. And, after losing faith, the only time that I have ever felt connected to something bigger than myself is when I feel small. And I don't understand the idea of that being taken away. And I'm not a hunter, but the hunting community is also upset by this because you have so many people that are privatizing lands and are having migratory herds stay on their land and prevent hunters from being able to have their recreation. So that's one of the big concerns of what Doge could do if you get rid of the federal employees for the Forest Service, if you get rid of federal employees for national parks. What's going to happen to Elliot when he grows up? Does he get to have these places to enjoy the way that you raised me to be able to enjoy in Alaska, that I got to enjoy as an adult on my own? Or is that going to be something that will just go by the wayside like a lot of other past recreations as time progresses?
yeah, one of the things that I go back to when I start thinking about public lands is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge up in Alaska. Um, and everybody calls it ANWR. Uh, and there's just been a big kerfluffle about um, uh, using the petroleum reserves that exist in a part of that reserve. So I've been there, and it is huge. I mean, it's literally the northeast corner of Alaska, the largest state in the union by far.
Is
And
it north of the Arctic Circle?
yes, yeah, but it
Okay.
starts. So it's it is a very, 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 very big reserve, and the vast majority of it, you can't get there except by on foot or on horse, mule, whatever, using some kind of feat, or in a helicopter. And I got up there in a helicopter. Um, but it is the most rugged, isolated, pristine, um, uh, mountainous land that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it's just massive, and it's not that there's uh, just a little bitty road or anything. There's no roads. There's no Forest Service roads. There's no roads that are cut for maintaining, the trees. There's nothing up there but land, the way that it's been for millennia. Uh, but then when you get to the very end of it, it kind of comes down. There's a little coastal plain, and then there's beaches. Now, if you drive the road that gets there, the road goes just to the west of the reserve, and it literally runs into where the coast is. And if you go to the left, there's another preserve, and I believe it's called the Alaska Petroleum Reserve. And if you go to the right, it's Anwar. So to the left, it's beaches like you normally see. There's some oil storage facilities, and then off the coast, you can't even see them from the coast, but off the coast there's oil rigs.
There's
And if you
offshore drilling.
because there's like a lot of oil up there. We talked about this a couple
Yeah.
episodes ago with the melting of the Arctic ice in the Arctic Ocean. The Arctic Ocean is open not only for navigation, but petroleum reserves that have long been inaccessible because of that ice are now accessible. And Russia is very much taking advantage of the opening shipping lanes and the opening petroleum reserves, and so is Finland, and so is Denmark. But the U.S. is like, we're not even willing to take a right at that road and take this tiny little sliver of this massive wildlife preserve, and utilize those natural resources that are in that area. And it's like, oh well, that's the only coastline like that. No, it's not. If you just keep going to the west and then to the south, the entire western coastline of Alaska looks almost exactly like that. And it's, again, pristine, lots of seals, lots of polar bears, lots of everything that you would expect to see in that kind of an area. And it's going to remain that way because there's nothing there that's worth what it would cost just to build a road to get to it. It's just really, really inaccessible terrain. And you don't know that unless you've been to Alaska, unless you've been there and you're like, whoa, this place is really, really large. It's really, really big. When we went camping in, now I've got to go against the president in Denali National Park because he wants to name
Yes. Yes.
When we went camping in Denali,
life.
yeah, I remember you and I got off the bus, man. We were just like,
We stayed there for like
we were
3 hours
with
just seeing
ADHD.
nature with nothing.
Yeah. And your mom was all freaked out because, after we got off the bus, she saw these grizzly bears and she's like, oh no, they're going to get eaten or whatever. But we just went out and we're exploring, and there's like this beautiful tundra and
Yeah.
these amazing lichen with, I mean, normally you think of lichen being like a mossy green, but this
Yep.
lichen is like green and red and there's purples
And
in
it
it, and
is the
it's just
most
like,
vibrant colors you will see anywhere in the country. And one of the other interesting things about the lichen is, to your point of how expensive it is to develop in Alaska, which a lot of people in the contiguous 48 don't understand, is the reason that there's lichen and moss is because it's permafrost. So there's so much moisture in the soil because it's constantly freezing and then melting and then freezing and then melting. So even when you do build a road on it and you get through all the money of building the road, that road doesn't last that long because the freezing and melting moves it around. Those roads get destroyed. So the maintenance costs on those roads are astronomical for nobody to drive them.
yeah, it's just, and so it's there's this big political movement to stop us from utilizing very important natural resources, um, in order to preserve the kind of, I mean, there's like, um, I don't know how many miles, so I'd be making it up, but there is a lot of miles of coastline if you go to the west from there. And it just happens that that one place is where the oil is. And why wouldn't we do that? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. And another thing for people to really take into consideration is most people don't look at the actual size of what Alaska is. Most cartographer maps have a condensed version because they're not going to show you all of Canada and the actual size. They're going to disconnect Alaska, scale it down so that way you can see, oh, this belongs to America as well. But realistically, if you're going from, Burrow to Juneau, which is like the most northern point to one of the most southern points, you're basically driving Idaho to Texas. And it's that squared, it's a huge, huge state. And even in it being that large of a state, it has less population than Rhode Island, which is the tiniest footprint state.
Yeah, and there's so it's one of those things. So there's like a tradition in the United States that the Secretary of Interior comes from Western states, and they typically, and Trump did this as well. They typically pick someone who has been a governor in a Western state to be the Secretary of Interior. And the reason for that is because that's where all the federal land is. There's, from the Mississippi eastward, I mean, there is some really beautiful country in the Appalachians. We lived in the Appalachian Mountains for a
Hmm.
while. But
Poconos up in the Northeast.
yeah, there's, but, I mean, you can drive completely through the a national park on the East Coast in like an hour and a half. And I mean, just to the west of where I am right now is the beginning of the Rocky Mountain National Park, and it's a long drive to get to the other side, and
Hmm.
it's literally this just massive mountain range that that again is it's pristine territory, and it's not pristine territory just because it's protected. It's pristine territory because it's rugged, and getting access to it is would be tremendously difficult. Um, and you've got to figure out some way of making a profit through that access. And if you can't make a profit through the access, why would you even bother?
Yeah. Yeah, that's I and there's an argument that has been made to me that I don't necessarily agree with, but I can kind of understand, and it's that the federal government is stewards of the land until the technology comes about where it's more readily available to be developed. And I don't want to think that that's the case. I really do think that it's a preservation aspect of it, but I also don't have faith in the government to think that their job is to preserve things. That's one of the unfortunate things of kind of like coming back to that grieving process that I was talking about in the morning is once you start seeing the writing on the wall, and once you start seeing, oh, this is reality. It's we've both been divorced, and at some point it clicks, and then you have that, oh, okay, that's going away now. I had that this weekend at the shop, and it's like, oh, but how do you stop that ball from moving?
Yeah, there's so you spend so much energy trying to preserve the status quo. And people are like, oh, well, that's the problem. We're always trying to preserve the status quo. Well, again, I mean, there's in my lifetime, just in my lifetime, um, the uh, the the advancement of civil rights that my mother only dreamed of has come into fruition. Um, we won an entire war without any major uh, 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 any major armed conflict. I mean, there were small conflicts like um, uh, Grenada and Panama and Kosovo, and but those were very small conflicts and very regionalized conflicts. None of those conflicts erupted into the kind of um, wars that we had in the first half of the 20th century. The last half of the 20th century was winning a war without guns. Well, not without guns, because it was winning a war by having a lot of guns that you don't shoot, that you
Well,
just
we went from complete war of attrition to how can we show strength and prevent, to tactical surgery, and now it seems like it's trade war. And that was, I was talking to Haley about this the other night because, again, going back to that whole Trump is the person who's willing to cross the line, and I'll give him credit, it worked. It worked. He got the troops to go. He got the other countries to do what they want. And on top of that, worked with Colombia, and apparently it's working with Panama. And I was bringing up the idea of, if you're gonna go to war and you have to tell people what kind of losses they're gonna have, would you rather tell people your sons and daughters are going to die, or I'm gonna piss you off? And one of those two things is a much more acceptable thing because you get to live through it.
yeah, it's like the global war on terror. There's during that 20-year war, um, only 1% of the U.S. population fought in that war in the military. Lots of other people did other things. The Department of Homeland Security was obviously, um, came into being. The Transportation Security Administration came into being. So there was lots of other people who were involved in defending the homeland from the kind of attack we had on September 11th. But when you compare 1% over a 20-year period to the volume of people who were involved in World War II and World War One, you're like, oh, wait a minute. I mean, this was, and even Vietnam. Vietnam uh, was still a war where there was a draft, but the global war on terror was fought entirely by people who volunteered to go. And here's another interesting. So 1% of the U.S. population fought in that war, but almost 14% of people between the ages of 18 and 24 fought. Um,
So a lot of young people.
yeah. People. It's so funny. I mean, I listen to people and they give Generation X and particularly the millennials a bunch of crap, and I'm like, wait a minute. These, I mean, these are the folks that showed up in large numbers, and when they didn't have to. I mean, it's like Bill Clinton dodged the draft. There's Joe Biden dodged the draft because there was a draft in Vietnam, and
Hmm.
and a lot of people were forced to go and fight in that war, and people who were privileged didn't have to go fight in that war. And Donald Trump is one of those privileged people. Joe Biden is one of those privileged people. Bill Clinton is one of those privileged people. Um, so, uh, so, but in this past war, you didn't you didn't have to dodge the draft. You just had to do something else.
Yeah, and
There's go
that
ahead.
was happening right as Brad and I were turning 18, and I remember being worried about it because of how many people were joining, and it seemed like, oh, this is an inevitability, but it wasn't actually an inevitability. It was kind of this overarching sensation. But yeah, it's exactly what you're saying. There are enough people that if the reasoning is right, I think that there are a lot of people that are willing to fight for a right cause. It's the interesting thing between Vietnam and 9/11 is I think that the purpose of Vietnam was much less accepted by the public, and that's why there was such a issue getting people to fight for it. And it's also right after, you've got the sexual liberation movement, you've got the Summer of Love, you've got people being introduced to a world of psychedelics, and people are actually free thinking for themselves. And there's a huge cultural resistance to it. I've never in my life felt more connected with people than all of us felt like we were getting attacked and we needed to band together. And you saw kind of the same thing during World War II. You had people under 18 lying about their ages to sign up to go fight in something that they believe in. And to a certain extent, I'm glad that that actually is an American value, is like if something bad is going to happen and you recognize it, we're not running away from that. For the most part, we're running towards that. And I think that that's where, people look at masculinity as a negative thing. But I heard someone on Bill Maher a couple years ago. It was a woman that was talking about positive max or not positive masculinity, but heroic masculinity. And it's the whole firefighters that were running into the World Trade Center. Like they're going to do what the right thing is, knowing what their outcome is, or not knowing what their outcome is. And I do think that it is very uniquely American and very uniquely this generation that can see things for what it is. They're a lot more willing to fight. The irony of that is, as we're entering into an age of more information, we're potentially entering into an era where we might not need those people. Um, and that is always curious for what will happen for generations after. What happens if we don't see conflict? Does that make us a more relaxed nation, or does that actually help us kind of realize that there is a better way?
Yeah, I think there's a really good argument to be made for uh, uh, for the for the view that we are already fighting World War III. Um, because it's like you look at World War One, and World War One was fought in a particular way, uh, and the way that we fought World War Two was totally different than the way that we fought World War One, and that was mostly due to advances in uh, weapons technology. I mean, we were using biplanes and pilots and biplanes using pistols to try and shoot other pilots um, in World War One. But by the time World War II came along, we were carpet bombing entire cities, and I mean, like Dresden in Germany, there were Tokyo in Japan. There was uh, just the capacity for killing people um, had really developed to a very refined science by the time we got to World War II. So I think it's unlikely. We always like to think of, oh, well, we're going to fight a war like this last time we fought a war. I don't think World War III is going to look anything at all like World War II did. And one of the ways that it appears to be um, manifesting itself is by proxies. So the major players in World War III are going to be um, the United States, uh, Russia, and China, with Europe playing a smaller role in terms of the fight, but Europe will play a larger role. In fact, they're going to play a central role in instigating the fights. Um, but like we're and part of the Russia China axis. We'll just go with axis and allies to keep the
Or
war.
what? Well, we can just. I've now that I've learned more what BRICS nations are and what their that currency is, I think that that's kind of where the war is. It's not the Axis and the Allies. It's BRICS G7.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And the uh, the the actual hot wars where people are shooting each other is happening in the Mid East, but it's not Russia fighting the United States in the Mid East. It's Russia using proxies like Iran to fight American proxies like Israel. Um,
So that's yesterday's announcement of what Trump wants to do with Gaza. This is a perfect transition to talk about this. Um, I I have very, very mixed feelings on this because to a certain point, I think that because the world recognizes that America is a proxy to Israel, this could really, really paint a hateful image on America for an entire generation of people in the Middle East, in the same way that us being in Afghanistan and Iraq was the entire generation of those kids growing up and potentially not enjoying our presence being there. You know, you can potentially create a generation of resistance fighters. Um, if we displace Palestinians permanently and put them in nations that they are ideologically aligned with, which would hopefully give them a new home, I can understand the argument where some people would think that that is a form of ethnic cleansing or a form of trying to remove a group of people. And I can understand that argument. On the other side, and all of this is the conflict in my own head. I have not talked to anyone about this one. Is imagine how much more stable America would be if we had a much more stronger allyship by being neighbors in the way that we're neighbors with Canada in the Middle East. And what kind of stability could that provide to our side? Um, and I don't know which one of those is the one that I have more emotions to yet.
yeah, it's uh, it I think it's a foolish idea. I mean, I really think it's a very foolish idea. I understand why he's doing it. He's a real estate developer, and
Hmm.
uh, he's absolutely right that um, if it were a relatively peaceful place, you could. It's beautiful. I mean, it's absolutely. If you just look at the pictures of what existed of Gaza before this current war began, um, it was a beautiful place, a
Hmm.
wonderful coastline, um, really, really great weather. Um, uh, there's you can get access to it from pretty much anywhere in the world because it's right, along major air routes, major sea routes. Um, so there's lots of things that Gaza has going for it, but but uh, they those people have I mean, even if you just just take the Exodus narrative of the Bible at face value. um, when the Israelites went to occupy at the time what was called Jordan, uh, uh, the it was already occupied by other people. Israel sent the spies over, and they're like, "Oh man, these people are huge. We don't want to go there." There it was already occupied by people, um, and the people that it is are the ancestral uh, um, lineage for the Palestinian people. Um, Now, there's a good argument to be made that the Israelites, that the Exodus story is a mythical narrative, um, and uh, and the the people of who are now called Israel had lived there for a long time, for a very, very long time, and they were just one of the tribes from that nation. But either way, whether you take the biblical narrative on its face value or you take a more archaeologically accurate view that there was a Semitic people of some kind that had lived in that generation or in that geography for a very, very long time. Um, both the Jews and the Palestinians have been living in that land for many thousands of years, and they have been fighting one another over that land for many thousands of years. And the uh, Hamas's stated goal is the expulsion of all of Israel. They don't want
Yeah.
uh, uh, Jews in their land anymore. They want that land to be their land. So I think the notion that oh well, hey, this is good. We could make this a really great resort if you guys would just go to Egypt, or if you guys would just go to Syria, or if you guys would just go to Lebanon, or any
Give
place.
up your 1,000-year crusade. Just give it up.
Yeah, not gonna. It's just not. It's not going to happen. And it's. I mean, we have kind of something similar in the United States in that much of the southeastern United States, the former Confederate states, the former states that were fighting on the Confederate side in our Civil War. Uh, those there's a Southern heritage um, that was born out of the Lost Cause movement. There's all kinds of things that you can say that, oh well, this is horrible that they still believe this, but that's their land, and they very much view that that
This is my granddaddy's land. It was his granddaddy's land before him, and it's going to be my grandkid's land, and it's going to be his grandkid's land. This is how it's been, and it'll always be.
that's
We've
exactly
never heard
right.
anything
And
like that living in Georgia.
yeah, it's and and uh, and those people are not they're not inherently racist. They're not inherently anti anybody. They're just
And they're not
very
wrong either.
yeah, they're just very pro uh, South. And
Yeah.
if you look at the way our nation is designed and the way that it's kind of gotten away from this, but um, you know, people who were Virginians before they were Americans. and people were Georgians before they were Americans. People were New Englanders before they were Americans. Their allegiance um, was more towards their regional geography because the greater United States, they had very little in common with anybody except for their neighbors and their kin. Um, and that's a little bit less now, but it's still, people in the Western United States definitely think that East Coasters are very different from them. New Englanders are still pretty proud of their locality. Obviously, we just mentioned the South, um, and Pacific Northwesterners. Folks from Idaho, Oregon, and Washington.
Idaho is not part of the Pacific Northwest. I get super, super, super. It's like when people say it's Boise and it's Boise. Uh,
Yeah,
the Idaho is actually still part of the Rocky Mountain region. So for all of you basic people that keep calling Idaho PNW, we're not Oregon and we're not Washington as much as we want to be. You have to get past that mountain ridge to get that weather climate. I'm on the other end of where you are.
yeah, but one of the
But we're in the same region, and Colorado and Idaho are so wildly different.
there's a but uh, if you look at landmass, Idaho has more in common with the people of Washington and the people of Oregon um, in terms of landmass. There's Portland and Seattle represent coastal Washington and coastal um, Oregon, but Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington
You mean the
are,
people that want to be part of Idaho?
yeah, that's exactly
Yeah,
right. That
yeah.
that the Greater Idaho movement is because um, they're and that's one of the reasons why I but I think I take your point very I think you're right in that there is nothing in common between most of Idaho and Portland, most of Idaho and Seattle. Very,
Uh,
very different places.
the Greater Idaho Initiative is kind of an interesting one because the whole thing is there are about 14 counties in Eastern Oregon that feel that because of the populace of Portland, that it skews the voting of the entire state, which arguably is correct. And the rural individuals that have very, very like Eastern Oregon is Trump country. We were driving through a couple of years ago to John Day National Park to go see the Painted Hills, which is one of the most beautiful national parks we've been to. It looks literally like just God brush stroked some mountains. It's this cool geological formation. And we're going through all these little, population 100, 200 people cities, and it is unified like Trump, 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 Trump. Then you get to Portland, and it's Portland. And what I always thought was really interesting is Malheur County in Oregon is the easternmost county, and it's the county that butts up to Idaho. And this is the county that has the most marijuana tourism because Idaho is still one of a few states that has full restrictions and full prohibition. There's no medical, there's no recreational. They just implemented a new law that if you have any amount on you, it's a guaranteed minimum $300 fine, even if it's just like half of a gram. So Malheur County, out of marijuana sales, is 10% of the entire tax revenue for the entire state of Oregon. So you've got these counties that want to join Idaho. And it's like, okay, so Idaho is going to have to take on all the burden of managing your land, but we don't get any of the tax benefits because all of the things that are legal immediately become illegal. So what's going to happen is we have a further financial burden to manage this, and then the rest of Oregon gets a huge loss in tax revenue. So yeah, they have less land to manage, but they're getting so much less money, and it's not like that money was needing to go to those rural areas anyway. So they were profiting huge off of these. So I see it as a no-win situation if this thing goes through, unless, and this may happen with this administration, fingers crossed, unless the federal government actually decriminalizes marijuana to an extent that Idaho matches suit. And if Idaho matches suit, you could wind up seeing a different argument being made. We could make a ton of money off of infrastructure that's already existing in an industry that we haven't been able to capitalize on. And we would immediately be getting all of that money. We could manage those resources. And Idaho, I think, actually does a fairly great job of public land management. But until something like that happens, it is a losing situation. And it's just a lot of people that are kind of like us that are simply dissatisfied with the politics of where they live currently because of the outweighing voices of the majorities in specific areas.
Yeah, there's and it's so interesting that that tourist thing, because that's in I mean, I live in downtown Boulder, Colorado, so I'll be walking along the mall, and we've got just all kinds of dispensaries, marijuana dispensaries, cannabis dispensaries, um, that are just among the businesses that are there. I mean, I walked past one this morning that's been in business for 15 years, selling cannabis to the public, and almost always you go by and there's people from somewhere in the United States who have just come out of their very first cannabis dispensary, and they're like, "Ooh, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna?" And they're like so excited. They're like little kids in a literal little kids in a candy store, because uh, cannabis is a driver of tourism. That's one of the reasons why people come to Colorado, and now um, uh,
There's
there's
psilocybin tourism in Denver.
yeah, and it's all over the state now that we it was a statewide referendum, so now psilocybin is legal, but then it's got to be it's just like cannabis. There's counties and cities in Colorado where weed is still illegal there, because
There's still dry
even though
counties.
yeah, it's just like a dry county. That's all it is.
Oh,
There's there, for people that don't know, in the South there used to be dry counties. There may still be, um, where alcohol is still not allowed to be sold anywhere. And
Westerville, Ohio, I think just recently within the last 2 decades got rid of their prohibition in that county.
yeah, and it's there's a lot of reason for uh, keeping it, I guess. But one of the challenges is you encourage people to drive farther to get to a bar that will serve them, and then they drive farther drunk. And you can say, well, they shouldn't be doing that in the first place, but they don't. But they do. There's but Boulder just started issuing licenses, and the thing with psilocybin is they uh, you can't just go in and buy mushrooms and take them out with you. You can go and you can buy uh, mushrooms or mushroom derivative products. There's a big controversy about that, but you
Yeah,
can
there's
buy.
some of those derivative products get advertised to me on social media, and there's this one company that I won't say their name because I'm not going to send business their way, but they do some cool stuff. And they have these gummies that are Amanita muscaria gummies, and I was like, you can ship that to Idaho? That what? how are you doing this? And then you go through the FAQs and they talk about the derivatives. And that's kind of the same thing that there's a lot of cannabis companies that have learned the loopholes of what to do. And frankly, like that's kind of the cat and mouse game of regulation on drugs, especially with when it comes to marijuana and psilocybin. I personally think that the research indicates that they are a lot safer than alcohol. So just regulate it and put some rules around it, make it so that way there's safe measures and learn the science of it so it can be done to protect people and do the same thing that Idaho does. Like I actually really so many people hate it that moved here from California because in California you can go to Bevmo or you can go to Walgreens or your CVS store and just get whiskey wherever. I like that it's a state-run liquor dispensary and having the state say, no, we want taxes out of this. And if there's going to be vices, we think that vices should be taxed. And cigarettes are taxed. It's a vice. Alcohol is taxed. It's a vice. Marijuana, can it be used medically? Absolutely it can. Can it be used recreationally? Absolutely it can. And as a recreation, I think it's a vice that should be taxed. I've had my own journey with psilocybin in the past, and do I believe that it has some amazing healing properties? Yeah, I used it as therapy and it knocked me out of a depression. Like it immediately pulled me out for a very, very, very long, tangible amount of time. And I'm very much an advocate for the research that's being done with veterans with PTSD and people who are having an inability to deal with the daily anxieties and not even large scale doses, but micro dosing. So that way you can just simply have a little bit more cognitive abilities. I think that just needs more research, and you don't get that unless it's regulated. That's why I think Colorado was so fantastic in kind of being the front runners. Everyone thought that it was going to be California, but it was you guys in Colorado that were like, no, we're gonna show you that this can be done in a really good way. And how many roads got built? How many schools got built? You know?
Yeah, and that's I think that's the way that the psilocybin is going to work as well, but even more so because it like I said, you can go in, you can get the psilocybin usually through mushrooms, and but you have to consume it on the premises in a supervised way. So
Okay.
yeah, so trip sitting is a literal job in Colorado now. That's what you do. You're like, okay, people come in, they trip on mushrooms, and I try and keep them from jumping out the window or whatever. Um, but
So I I think that that's a hilarious concept simply because so for anyone who's familiar with that area, set and setting is a major, major, major thing. It's really important. And I have tried two different scenarios when I was trying to uh work on my mental health issues. And the first thing that I did was a very large amount of psilocybin with someone who was a very good friend and knew me and could ground me. And I think very much that the trip sitter being personally connected with me helped me through one of the most difficult experiences that I have ever gone through. Like what I experienced during that was just a challenge. I got really, really nervous wanting to do that again, mostly because of the legality behind it, especially in the state of Idaho. And ketamine clinics started coming up, and I started talking to my doctor about doing ketamine therapy, which is another uh, it was described to me as a psychedelic experience similar to mushrooms, but the issue is that it was a dissociative experience and it was nothing at all like it whatsoever. But being in this sterile hospital environment made a situation so much more terrifying for me because I felt like I was in the place that I was gonna die, and then I just got stuck in that place. So the idea of being a professional trip sitter and you're sterilizing the experience, yeah, that's a good thing, but also fundamentally that's not a good thing.
There's from my perspective, I think at least the way that I hope it grows is I think you're absolutely right, and the clinical side of it could be not helpful at all. But but if you think in terms of a bartender, a
Yeah.
good bartender uh, is a tremendous benefit for the people at the bar. Um, Particularly people who people who have um, some kind of addictive disorder, substance use disorder, and alcohol is their drug of choice. It's the bartenders that keep those people grounded. It's like, hey, can I call you a cab? Do
Okay.
you think it's time for you to go home?
Well, in
And
Idaho, we have a tip certification. That's what it's called, is you have to get tip certified in order to be able to become a bartender. And that's, are you over serving somebody? Are you recognizing when somebody is depressed? Do you know how to be able to have this conversation? Do you know how to cut someone off when you need to? The thing that would be really curious for me on this specifically, though, is you never really know when it's going to kick in. And you also don't necessarily know how long it might last. So is it just is this going to become a loophole where, okay, I'm going to come here, I'm going to eat it, I'm going to have my chocolate bar, but okay, we had our talk. Cool. We're gonna sign this. I'm gonna go walk around downtown and see all the lights now. Is that the loophole, or is there some kind of check and balance in there where, hey, is the roller coaster started yet? No? Okay, you're still hanging out, right? Okay, good. To make sure that the experience is actually being supervised, because when I had my experience, it lasted for like 6 hours. Um, so does that become an additional cost of, okay, now I'm spending, let's say $40 on a couple grams of mushrooms, but then I'm also spending $40 an hour on the guy babysitting me as I'm seeing God?
yeah, and that's the so that's very much the discussions that are taking place right now, as because again, none of these establishments are open yet. They're just going through the regulatory process of, okay, now Boulder has said we're going to have them. We've got setback requirements, so it can't be this close to a school. Um, and now that those requirements have been set, people are going to move into that space and start opening up businesses within those guidelines. And so people are already thinking about it, and Denver moved quicker than the rest of the state. So there's some knowledge to be gained from those facilities that have opened down there. But that's very much the experimentation, I guess, is a good way to put it. And that's why I say I hope it, because the psilocybin is definitely, the laws are more towards the clinical side than cannabis. Cannabis is just like going um, into any retail store, um, and they call them bud tenders. The bud tenders that sell the cannabis products, they know the product very, very well. They can talk to you about what you're going to experience, but then you leave the premises and you go someplace else, and there's no kind of supervision, no connection there.
Right.
This is very much, and with alcohol you can do that too, right? So you don't have to go to the bar and stay to the bar. You can go to the package store, get a handle of vodka, and just drink yourself into oblivion at home. Um, but this is going to be, at least initially, it's going to be kind of different, And the way that I hope it turns out is there's not like, oh, you have to be a clinical therapist to be a trip sitter, because I think that would be I don't think that would be helpful. But I think somebody I mean, I've met some really, really fantastic bartenders, and I've watched them handle folks, and I've been handled by them. I've been that guy who's there's at the bar, and I'm mourning a dead friend, or I'm mourning a lost relationship, or I'm going through this really, really difficult time. And so not all bartenders, but some bartenders are much more than a dispenser of alcohol. Um, and they kind of take care of people who need care, and just give beers to people who are just having a good time, and they don't need any real supervision. So that's how I hope it comes out. I think some people are going to go, and they're going to go into a room that has, they're going to curate it so that it's got lava lamps and
Yeah, they're
um,
gonna watch Speed Racer on 4K and just be stoked on the colors.
absolutely, yeah. And
Yeah.
some people are going to have no interaction with the trip sitter, except for maybe an occasional check-in or something like that. But other people are going to be like, whoa, and it's going to be, they're going to want some kind of person to guide them. You mentioned that people with who have, PTSD is a good example. I think that's kind of used as a catch-all, because people are like, oh, well,
Well,
veterans with PTSD, and then as soon as
I
you say
I
veteran,
that's why I said PTSD and not necessarily veterans with PTSD. I think people who go through sexual abuse go through PTSD. I think people who go through physical abuse in their relationships go through PTSD. I think people who are manipulated and being coerced into thinking that they're less than themselves can go through a form of PTSD. We talked about this once with my experience and the things that I discovered about the physical abuse that you were unaware of during my childhood. And I'm in the middle of this experience discovering as an adult that somebody sexually abused me as a child. And the only reason that I think that I actually got through that process is because my trip sitter was one, an amazingly close friend, but two, the other reason I chose him is because he was a first responder. And I knew that if something bad were to happen, he would have a certain skill set to be able to deal with it in a way that somebody else wouldn't be able to. And I'm so grateful that he was available to be there, because as soon as he realized what I was talking about, he went immediately into the same mentality he has when he goes and finds 5-year-old kids that have been abused. And he is talking to me as though I was going through it in that moment. And this is one of the interesting things, like alcohol will obviously loosen up your lips a little bit, but you may not necessarily be having discoveries about yourself. And the human brain is fascinating at how resilient it is and how easy it is to remove memories of pain. I think that that's one of the reasons why people get tattooed so much. You don't remember the pain, you go through it and then you forget about it. And when your body experiences a tremendous pain, your brain is going to do what it can to protect you from that pain and forget that pain. And as a bartender, you never know what pain that person has gone through. And if this is somebody's first experience and now they're discovering something for themselves, should it be somebody who's tip certified, or should it be somebody who is potentially readily available to discover what that other person is discovering?
yeah, and that's so that becomes part of the mix. And I think that from a business perspective, um, the companies that go into this business are going to want to have trip sitters. I don't know what they're going to call it. That's what I've just always called it, trip
Yeah.
sitter. There's so there, whatever it's going to be called, it's going to be called. But there's from my very first experiences um, with psychedelic substances, and I was young. I mean, I was just I had a very different childhood than you had, and and I was yeah, I was not a good member of society as a young person. So I did a lot of drugs, committed crimes, those kinds of things, um, and so I mean, I was taking LSD at 14. Um, so and I mean, I still have memories from what it from those experiences, and I'm lucky that um, nothing bad really happened. But I did have some really, well. Anyway, I'm not going to get into. Oh man, I've had these great trips.
I'm not going
But
to tell people I had a great time.
yeah, there's a. I will. I'll give one little anecdotal uh, encounter. I was with a friend of mine named Todd, and we were just like totally, very, very um, uh, hallucinogenic under LSD, and we decided we were going to walk to Baskin Robbins. I was living in Connecticut, and we were going to go to a Baskin Robbins and get some ice cream. And there's this big road called the Post Road that you go across in order to get to the Baskin Robbins. So I started to cross the road, and I got to like the other side, and I went to step up on the curb, but the curb moved away. So as soon as I went to step on it, the curb moved back like 3 feet. So I walked up to the curb and I stepped on it again. I went to step on it and it moved away. And then this kept happening, and it took me the longest time. So I came to enough, or I had enough wherewithal to realize that I'm probably standing in the middle of the road, tiptoeing across, because I think I'm on the other side and I'm not on the other side, and I'm just totally. So that's when we realized we needed a trip sitter. We needed somebody to make
Yeah.
sure we didn't harm ourselves, because I wasn't like freaking out or anything like that, but the world that I was seeing was not the world that existed. It was the world that was in my mind.
That's a I there was a really terrifying moment that I had. So we I haven't had any lengthy. I've had a handful of experiences because I'm not I view psilocybin. I think there's two different mentalities when you talk to people who look into psychedelics. I think that there's people who are wanting to have a good time, and then there's people who are wanting to use it as medicine. And one of the differences that I always took a look into is the people who are wanting to have a good time define it as a good time. And then if it's not a good time, it's a bad time. When they're defining it, which means that they're putting control over what that experience is. And you're turning on your subconscious. You don't have any control in the situation. So before I had ever done any of this at all, I'm talking to a bunch of friends to see like what the different mentalities of it are. And someone had told me the less control you put on it, the more you get out of it. And it's not a good trip or a bad trip. It's the experience that you have and what you take out of it. And a lot of people were calling it, their reset because it would be challenging for them. They would learn something and then they would be able to move on with that new knowledge because they were stuck in a place and it would help them get out of it. And I think that it's two very, very different mentalities. So I've not done it a lot because I look at it as I need to get through something. And I'm in a fortunate place now where I'm not depressed the way that I was, so I don't really pursue it. So the when I was pursuing it, and this one specific time that was a very life-changing time for me, there was a lot of realizations that I made. Um, so my buddy's there, and he has a dog, and it is a gorgeous dog. It is an Italian Mastiff. It is a beast. And the dog immediately recognized that I was concerned of stuff. And this dog, nobody is allowed to pet this dog. It is his dog and is a protector. Dog comes up to me, does not leave my side. I start to feel really, really sick. Like I'm just gonna retch and I'm gonna throw up. And I was like, okay, I need you to go away, please. Like, oh, please leave me alone because I'm gonna throw up right now. Oh man, leave me alone, please. And dog wouldn't leave me alone whatsoever. So I get sick and I am just now looking down at the ground and I am heaving and heaving and heaving and I am just throwing up all of the poisons that I put inside my body. And dog comes over, laps it up. And I'm like, oh
That dog's going to be
no.
tripping.
My dog, this dog is going to see terrifying things, and it is a terrifying dog, and it is going to tear me apart. And now my subconscious is reeling
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
going
yeah.
and spiraling. And oh, terrifying things happened for a very long time. So I finally, I experienced the whole thing. It's the next morning. We're talking in clarity, and I start apologizing profusely. And I was like, I am so sorry that your dog ate my vomit. Like, I'm so sorry. And he looks at me like, dude, literally all you were doing was like, "Ah." I wasn't doing anything. And it was all in my head. And I'm glad that that's the case. I'm very glad that that dog did not have a terrifying experience. But the reality of how much that created something that was already a little bit terrifying, way more terrifying, and then it just kept escalating and escalating and escalating. That's there's something for public concern that I think the regulation on the side of science also does need to recognize, there's if you buy marijuana, they're going to give you some kind of insert that says, "Hey, don't smoke while you're pregnant. This can be bad for children." Um, uh, are they going to do something with psilocybin that says, "Hey, this might break your psyche"?
Yeah, but my experience with psilocybin is I've always kind of described it as, and your experience sounds like it might have been a little bit different, but for me, it's always been, uh, mushrooms. You see things on mushrooms, but you see things that are part of the world. You just see them in a different way. So, like, I remember I was tripping once, and I was looking at a hillside, and this tree kept moving. Um, so it was a real tree, and it was a real tree that was there. But it was just like, and then I was telling everybody, I'm like, "Do you see that tree? It keeps moving." And they're like, "No, dude, you're just tripping."
Yeah.
Um, but but it but everything under psilocybin for me has been like I knew what reality was. And I might have been experiencing, I was very much experiencing things in a different way, but I knew what reality was. LSD is way more intense, way more, you used the word disassociative. I think that'd be a good way to describe it because you are in a trip in a completely different world,
Like,
totally
is
different
it
world.
like you're on a rail car just watching things happening?
Yeah, and so like there's and I describe it as there's like um so there's different ways that you see things. So you may see things that are real, but they're just fantastically real. So a bus drives by and then all you see is like this bus that just keeps going. It's like the bus has been elongated
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
there's so we always call that trails. I'm seeing trails
Yeah, trails
where
or tracers.
yeah, they kind of melt and they go by. So that's something that is just in a different way. But then
Now,
there's like things that you see that are in the real world, but they're not there. So like I remember I was tripping once and I saw it was like an Alice in Wonderland scene, but I saw these cards and they were like huge cards. They were like 3, 4 foot high, tall, and they were floating all around the room and they were folded kind of like an S and they had people's faces on them. Uh, and the cards were talking. So that's another thing that I see in on LSD that I never saw on or experienced on mushrooms is audible hallucinations to where
Okay.
these characters are actually talking to me and saying things. And that's something that if you look at it, it's completely obvious that that's not a real thing. There are not 3 foot high playing cards with faces on them that talk to you. That's just a
Give
fantastic
give
thing.
Elon Musk 3 weeks. Give him 3 weeks. We will have these cards. They will be talking. It'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah.
It'll be great.
But then there's also where I would like my entire world became as if I was living in a cartoon. So so I couldn't see the room that I was in. I was in a forest, and that forest didn't exist anywhere except my mind. But I'm sitting on a bed. I believe I was sitting on a bed, but I don't see the bed. I don't see anything in the room. I see what's in my mind. And there's characters in those encounters that that again. So I hear them speaking to me. It's very much like being in a fantastic cartoon.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, and those there's the only thing that I've ever had experiences, hallucinogenic experiences on psilocybin is that first one that I mentioned, like a trail or what you call a tracer, or something that was in the world, or like that one time I was on LSD, but I was, you know, the curb was actually there. There was actually a curb, but
Right.
somehow my mind was taking what was on the other side of the street and extrapolating it and putting it right in front of me. And then it kept moving it away from me.
Now, one of the things when the first time that I really started looking into the science of psilocybin, I had listened to a TED talk actually, and it was talking about some research that was happening in Europe. And this was the first time that when I was looking into it, I had ever heard the term of a heroic trip, and specifically referring to the point where you have ego death. And the dosages that are kind of talked about for most people is like, if you want to microdose where you can just be a creative person, go through a normal day, not have any kind of psychedelic experience, but be able to just have a little bit more clarity, you're going to have like a tenth to maybe a fifth of a gram. Like it is a minuscule amount. And then if you just want to get like some nice flutteries in your heart, you could probably take about a gram. And then to get kind of what you're talking about, getting these tracers, the trees are melting into one another and the clouds are drifting, you're going to get to about 2.5 grams. But then once you start getting to about 3.5 grams, you start having these real challenges where now you're seeing things that could potentially be different than what reality is showing you. And around 5 grams is where you can experience something where you die and you experience the death of yourself. And one of the things that is talked about in the world of people who are using psilocybin as medicine is that ego death is a hard, hard experience. You accept the fact that you are going to die. And in that moment, you realize the things that matter the most to you. And it can really, really pull people out because once once you're in a depression and you realize what the reality of what the finality of death actually looks like, you understand that this world really is a gift. Um, that's a terrifying experience for people who want to have a good time. So that was the dosage that I had. I was just around 4.5 grams. And I remember the very last part of my trip was me actually having this out of body experience. Uh I am sitting alone, and in reality, there is a road right behind me. It's the road into the campsite that I'm at. What I'm experiencing is all of the trees have surrounded me. There is no road home. I'm not getting out of this. I am stuck here. And I look up, and it's kind of like you're looking up through the trees and you just see the canopy, but the canopy gets insanely tall and it just keeps growing and growing. And I get smaller and smaller. And I'm like, I'm surrounded by this and I can't get out of it. And then when I look down, I literally see myself. And when I see myself, I'm just lying dead on the ground. And then I start rising up above it. And I'm having this out of body experience where I'm looking at myself on the ground and I'm rising up to the canopy of these evergreens that are all around me. And I look up in the sky and there's this crazy swirling Ouroboros, and it feels like this energy that is calling me home. And like that's what I'm feeling. And as I'm looking at it, I'm getting called into this. And in that moment, like this was in the middle of COVID. I was stuck at home with my wife, and we were in the same space the whole time, and we were at high anxiety. We were very, very unsure of what was going on in the world. We were really, really butting heads, and we were having a bit of strife. And in that moment, I started bawling my eyes out and said, I can't do this. I'm not ready yet. All I want to be is at home with my wife and my dogs. That is all that I want to be. Of all the things that matter in life to me, is my family, it's my wife and my dogs. As soon as that hit, I came out of it. And it was a literally like boom. I had this realization of what the most important things in the world were for me. And then we started having the conversation about what it was that I had been experiencing. And I'm curious. So if that's where I was at, what are typically the experiences that you're at? Are you kind of like halfway there? Are you playing in the I want to have a good time range, or were you ever looking at it in a way other than recreation?
Well, when I was very young, I was just taking drugs to have a good time.
Yeah.
Um, and and I had kind of an experience like that, but uh, it was an encounter with my father. So I was in a I mentioned I was in a forest, and I started this character was chasing me through the forest, and the character was like a giant uh, nutcracker, like the nutcrackers that we saw. So it had that kind of a jaw,
Okay.
very,
I'm just
very,
imagining Grandpa Dick as a nutcracker,
yeah.
and it's a
So, and
nutcracker with giant eyebrows.
yeah, and on the face of this giant nutcracker was a black and white photograph of my dad, and he was chasing me, and he was saying this. There, I still remember what he was saying. He was saying, "Good evening, gentle Hyman Schmen. I've come to trample you." And he was stepping on me.
What?
And when he was stepping on me, it's not like I got kaplap and it was over with. It was like the bottom of his foot were pegs, and each peg was hitting me individually. And there was like this sound, boom, 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 as these pegs were coming down on me. Um, and in the background, while all that was going on, was this "Good evening, Gentlemen," which I don't even know what the hell that means.
The weirdest trip.
Yeah, yeah. So there's again, yeah, there's a now then when I was older, um, I was uh, I was in a very similar place that you were in um, uh, after my divorce when I was living in a van down by the river, um, and
Literally.
literally in a van down by the
Yeah.
river.
Yeah. Very literally.
The
No government cheese, but there was definitely a van by the river. Which now that place where your van was, you cannot get anything there. It is so full up, and there are people on waiting lists. Like you lived that life at the perfect time to live that life for being able to do what you were doing.
Yeah, it was there's a but I had a very large bag of mushrooms, a very very large bag of mushrooms that I had gotten from a guy, and so I was I was tripping on the regular, and and it was very much I think it would have been better if if I would have had some kind of a trip sitter, but I was very much um, uh, I, w- I was I was in a negative space in my real life, but the life that I would experience um, while I was under the influence of psilocybin was much much better, and um, none of the just like debilitating depression
Yeah.
and
It was a great form of escapism.
yeah, and there's a you mentioned that self-death. For me, I was at the time I was very much being antagonized by suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
Um, and and they were very persistent um and uh and I don't know if your experience with suicidal thoughts has been the same as mine, but mine were very audible. They were so I would hear voices
Yeah.
saying, you know, and those voices would go away while while I was tripping on psilocybin. So that's where I think the anecdotal evidence for psilocybin being effective in treating PTSD, depression, chronic anxiety disorders, um, and even yeah, I mean even things like again, I'm not a clinical therapist, but I I I slept at a Holiday Inn Express one time, uh, but like people with body dysmorphic disorders, um, there's I would presume I don't have body dysmorphic disorder, but I would have presumed that you would be able to see yourself in a very different light, and potentially, that dysmorphia might go away, um, because I mean, there's you know, that kind of condition, is pretty common amongst young people,
Yeah.
and one of the ways that historically it's been treated is by just hey, support them while they're going through it, but you know, this is one of those things that one morning you wake up and those massive breasts that were like the worst thing that you could imagine. You're like, because you were the only one in school that had breasts, and everybody else was, there you were just in front of everybody.
Are
Then
you
all of a
speaking of
sudden,
my experience when I developed breasts?
no, no, I'm just, I may, there. I mean,
Because that's been
uh,
within the last year, and I've been working really hard on that. Thank you.
I had I'll get away from the breast. I had a boss who was taking leave, and I was going to be. Uh-oh. Wow, that was
Hello.
weird.
You disappeared.
Am I here now?
I mean, your voice is still here, but I think you were taking leave, and then it was like,
Oh,
oh,
hang
okay, we're
on.
gonna have your face take leave.
I should come back here in a second. My because I turned my camera on, and then I turned somehow my camera turned off. and like everything went black. Uh, and what am I? Oh, hang on. See if that. Wow, this is
It just like completely shut the cam off altogether.
yeah. Let me see if I can. Hang on. I'm gonna.
And you're back. Oh, wait, that's a different camera angle.
Yeah, well, it's a different camera. Um, so I'm gonna try and go back to my regular camera, and it's not working. So I don't know
Well,
why this is.
zooming in.
Um, but
Well,
I'll just go with this for a little while. So now everybody, this black thing right here is actually my normal camera setup. Uh, but holy cow, what was I talking about?
well, I'll let me give you a theory on something that you were just touching on, and maybe that'll help you figure out or give some time for you to get your camera as well. So when you're talking about suicidal ideation, um, I have a theory, and hey, you're back. And I've talked to a handful of people about it, and this is very much my own experience. I don't have any way of being able to verify this, but it makes sense to me. And one of my wife's best friends is a very, very, very fortunate person who is happy legitimately and has not gone through depression. And I'm very envious of that. I don't know what that experience is. I really wish that I could know what it is to have these things work regularly. And I mean, I've been dealing with depression and suicidal thoughts since I was probably like 13, 14. I had a lot of body dysmorphia, especially in Hawaii. And I always thought that I was the fat kid, and that's why I always wore like t-shirts going to the beach. And it was something that mom had never recognized at all. And I really, really had a lot of um worry about myself throughout my teenage years. And getting tattooed was like the first time that I ever felt comfortable in my own skin, but I never really had community. And when I was working at the call center where I was doing operations management for the Affordable Care Act, I was getting to a point where every single day going to work was the conversation of should I do this? And then how will I do this? And then when will I do this? And it kept getting closer and closer and closer. And there's kind of a train that you can follow of you go from sad, and then you can go from sad to depressed, and then you can go from depressed to suicidal. And suicidal doesn't actually mean that you're going to do that. That just means that, hey, you're in a new danger territory. And this danger territory could look like one of three things. There's suicidal thoughts, which, if you're depressed, that could come in, but you could very quickly counter that and be like, I'm sad, I'm not that sad. Past suicidal thoughts is suicidal ideation. And that's when you're actually like, I want to park my car in the garage on Wednesday. And yeah, Wednesday, that could be a good idea. And once you get to ideation, there's a difference of how you think about it, and you start rationalizing it. And that's where you can potentially run the risk of going into the third space, which is suicidal attempt. And you're either going to be successful or unsuccessful. And, hope that you're not successful with that. I really hope that people are not successful with that. I understand why some people find success, but I do hope that people don't find success if they're in that space. But the issue at large is what you are doing is you're expanding capacity. So if happy people who have never gotten to the threshold of anything past sad, that's their capacity of emotion. But once you start getting depressed, it's easy for your mind to remember that you're depressed. Once you get suicidal, you remember that, and it's something that kind of bugs you. But my experience is once you've gotten to ideation and attempt, and you have actually changed the thought process in your mind where you've rationalized it as a good decision or the correct decision for you, you trust your own rationalization for the rest of your life. You will always trust that you are rationalizing a situation well. And I think that there is a large struggle for people who have gotten to ideation and attempts because those thoughts just simply exist. For the rest of your life, those thoughts are in your head, and it was rational at one point. So now you just have a constant battle of, yeah, I get it. I get it. Yeah, that's a rational idea. I don't want to do it yet. And you have to be in a place where you're telling yourself, no, I'm still going to listen to it. I'm listening to that rationale in my head. And it exists because I am still the same person I was when I rationalized at one point. But now there's this new criteria that's around me. And I want to hang out. I like being 6 foot above instead of 6 foot below. Um, but I do think, to your point, that when you have been suicidal at one point in your life, it is a lot harder to deal with those. So I can understand using psychedelics as an escapism because in the right dosages, it's euphoric and you are not going to want to leave that place. And I could absolutely see that being a very, very easy gateway into abuse of a substance. Um, the curious thing I would think of that though is uh, going back into the professional trip sitter world. Do you think that that should be a thing in a way where if you go to a therapist's office and you have the questionnaire, do you have any medical conditions? Do you have a history of high blood pressure? Do you have a history of suicidal thoughts? Do you think that that would be an appropriate thing for a trip sitter to be able to have that conversation with, to be able to ensure that they're there in the way that they need to be?
That's a really great question. I'm going to answer it in a couple ways. One, most directly, I think that they might have some kind of a questionnaire like that, um, but it would be a disqualifying questionnaire. So somebody who might say, "Yeah, I've been having suicidal thoughts," in that circumstance, um, I don't know if a business would want to uh, to
Have
take
that
that
liability.
to have that liability. So I think that even if there's somebody who's going through that, they're probably going to lie so that they can get what they wanted, what they went there for. Um, but I agree with your discussion of suicidal thoughts and ideation, and I've long said that really what we need to be striving towards is making survivors of suicidal thoughts. Um, there's so people like, oh well, uh, I've got substance use disorder, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a drug addict, or whatever, and they're like, well, I'm always going to be this way. And I think that that's in a lot of contexts, that's the natural progression of serious mental illness like bipolar disorder, chronic depression, those kinds of things. I think that it's very natural that you're like, oh man, I was thinking of this, and now those thoughts are always there, and you're in the rationalization conversation that you described. I think that at least that's been my experience, and I think it's probably pretty common for people who have had persistent suicidal thoughts. But my perspective has changed on it recently in the past just couple of years, um, because I was using substances, alcohol, cannabis predominantly, because they're legal here in Colorado. So I would go to the bar and I'd and I wasn't there anyway. So I was using these substances, and I thought I was using those substances in a therapeutic way, that 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 it was taking the edge off life, and cannabis is another one of those things. It's like, man, it makes me feel happy, and since I feel happy, I don't struggle with those 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 thoughts. But then you come down, right, and then when you come down, those thoughts are still there.
Yeah.
So, it's been a couple years now that I quit using both alcohol and cannabis, and but I haven't stopped the psychotropic medications that my doctor prescribed for me. Um, and after I stopped using alcohol and cannabis, we adjusted my medications somewhat. But it was one of the things that, by self-medicating, what I was doing is I was making things much harder for my psychiatrist, to um to uh to get me the right medications that I needed to make those kinds of things not appear. So now I don't have suicidal thoughts. I just plain don't have them anymore. I don't have to justify. I live completely without um, any kind of intrusive suicidal thought, and I have been this way for well over a year now. Um, and I attribute it to the actual medications that my psychiatrist prescribes. And it's kind of funny how funny, not funny, haha, how in the world of mental illness, uh, there's there's this, both within the people who have serious mental illness and just in society in general. They're like, oh well, doctors just keep prescribing these medications to people because they're only wanting to make money, and they're in the pockets of the pharmaceutical companies, and all these drugs are getting overprescribed, and la 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 la. And that is just not been my experience with my psychiatrist. Um, uh, she's not, she's not tied to any one particular medication. If it's not working for me, she'll take it off. If it is working for me, we'll talk about dosing, and how can I, limit some of the other side effects that the medication might cause. But so I'm actually a proponent for um, actual psychotropic medications that have been are evidence-based treatments that have been researched and approved for those kinds of things. Because I take them every day, and I take them in the morning, and I take them before I go to bed. I take a I, there's a I I'm my PTSD. I've been plagued with nightmares. Uh,
Yeah, for years.
yeah, for many
Yeah, like
years.
at most of my life.
Yeah, it's and uh and it, they're there's no way that you can control it because you're asleep.
Yeah.
And when I normally would end up getting awakened by the dream, you wake up and you're like where you were. So people are like, oh, well, you have flashbacks, these flashbacks, like you're having a hallucination during a trip. That's
Hmm.
not mine. I mean, I have dreams of places that I was at.
Yeah, you're
And
reliving moments.
yeah, and then you wake up, and not only are you emotionally feeling, well, not only are you just like feeling the adrenaline from that particular time, but emotionally you're going through the same things. And if during those circumstances you did things that you regret, that sense of guilt, all of those things are really, really and it's hard to deal with. But what I was doing is I was using alcohol to um, to make it so that I could get to sleep, because I wouldn't go to sleep because I was afraid when I went to sleep I would have a dream. So I was afraid to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And so I would drink myself until I could fall asleep. And then the alcohol would work. I wouldn't dream for a couple hours, but as soon as the alcohol wore off while I was sleeping, the dreams would start to take place. So I'd get a few hours of sleep and then I'd start dreaming again. There's now I take a med, and I still have very vivid dreams. So it's not like it took away my ability to dream, but I think I have dreams like a normal, healthy person has dreams. They're vivid, they're real. I understand what's going on, but I don't wake up terrified. And I'm not, and I mean, I can't tell you, it's been, like I said, well over a year since I've had the recurring dreams that I've had for decades. And it's all because I quit medicating myself with recreational drugs and started actually listening to my psychiatrist and doing and being honest with her about my symptoms and my side effects, and getting on to a medication regimen that actually works for me.
See, and I find that really, really interesting because I've had literally the opposite effects, or the opposite experience with medication. And when I was going to a doctor, and we were experimenting with a handful of SSRIs. Okay, we tried one SSRI and it didn't work, and it gave a series of horrible side effects. So we tried another SSRI. Then we tried a different dosage. Then we tried another dosage. And then we tried something different. And all the while, my personality was just getting chipped at. And it was becoming, I'm less and less and less of myself. And then when I finally had a conversation about none of this stuff was working, the last thing that my doctor wanted to put me on was lithium. And I was like, I don't want to be on lithium. Like that's the last thing that I actually want to be on. I'm gonna start smoking. I'm just gonna see what that does. And I don't have nightmares of things that happened, but my entire dreaming experiences was nothing but night terrors. And I had insomnia to the point that I was only getting like an hour and a half of sleep a night for a good couple of years. So when I started pursuing cannabis, it definitely was, I want something that will help me sleep because I need sleep. And I was having fun with it, but I really was doing it for sleep. When I went back, even in the aspects of psychedelics, I looked at mushrooms as this idea of like, well, this is natural. This is something that, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's a volume knob for my subconscious, and it's natural. That's coming of the earth. Marijuana is coming of the earth. I can buy into this. These pharmaceutical things, I have a real hard time because of the SSRIs. But then I gave it another shot and I tried ketamine. And the way that I had described ketamine for me was, if you've ever seen the Lego movie, have you ever seen it?
No.
Okay. So there's a scene where they go into one of the Legos mines, and there's like a handful of Legos that are called master builders, and they're like the Jedi of I can build anything to attack what's happening in front of me, and I can build this gigantic spaceship and get away from the situation. And you can go into each one of their minds and see how it is that they think. And then they go into the main character's mind, and it is a blank void. There's nothing in there whatsoever. And everyone's like, "You got nothing in here." He's like, "Yeah, I have all this space to do whatever I want. Look, I can do a double-decker couch." Boop. And he has capacity that the other people don't have, which I think was a really, really fascinating part of the movie, is it's talking about the capacity for imagination versus the limitations of imagination. Um, when I was on ketamine, I was in that room, and I'm literally disassociating with reality, and I'm in this blank void of a room that, oh, this is kind of cool. I can explore everything. I think about something and boom, it explodes and I can face it and then it'll go away. And I started describing it to people in a way where it's like I'm on the beach and I don't know how to swim. And there's so much stuff just out past the shore that I really, really wish that I could see. And I don't know how to swim, so I can't find it. But ketamine was low tide. And low tide, oh man, I'm walking 50, 60 feet out. There's some cool stuff out here. There's little tide pools. There's a little starfish here. There's crabs. There's all sorts of things. But now, when the ketamine goes away, I'm 60 foot out and I don't know how to swim. I have never been so close to making an attempt successful than the 2 weeks following the medical prescription of a psychedelic or a dissociative. Um, and because of my experience with SSRIs and ketamine having such a negative impact on me, and these things that I try to pursue naturally having a more positive experience on me, uh, I've really, really gravitated towards more of a natural approach. And the thing that I've found in the last year that's actually helped me with sleep is exercise. If I wake up in the morning and I'm exerting myself, by the end of the day, I'm out. I am exhausted and I'm not dreaming. I am just and then I wake up the next morning and I do it again. And what's interesting about that is it's twofold. One, I'm moving, which is making my body feel better. And two, I'm sleeping, so my brain has the ability to process things a whole lot easier, and I'm not rationalizing things anymore. So in this last year of me working out, that has been the thing that's actually helped my depression more than anything else. And what was kind of funny is I had I had consumed the last of my cannabis before all of this stuff that happened at the shop happened, and I'm like, I have to sit in this. Oh no! And in my life right now, I'm probably going through uh the most anxiety and uncertainty and stress than I have ever had in my entire life. And I remember 3 days ago, Haley and I were talking about my anxiety levels, and I told her specifically, I need to sit in this. And it's not that I want to sit in this, but I need to meditate on this. I need to memorize this experience. I need to know how this is impacting me, and I need to know how I actually am with this. Because if I am experiencing this huge and I'll call it a trauma because trust me, it is right now. Uh, if I don't actually experience it, it's going to happen again, and I cannot allow it to happen again. So I am very much figuring out what this new fully natural approach is going to be, but it's been kind of empowering the last couple of days dealing with everything.
There's yeah, there's you mentioned lithium. I took lithium for a little while, and lithium worked. I mean, it took away. I didn't. There's but it made me very numb. There,
That was the thing. I I remember with Simone, my ex-wife, I was like, there was a comedian that we grew up with, Mark Lowry. And I know you remember Mark Lowry,
yeah,
part of the Gaither Vocal Choir. And he had talked about what Christianity was. And in one of his skit, I don't know why I remember this stuff. He talks about life with Christ isn't, just life. It's life more abundantly. And that's what he's talking about. And I'm okay with the low lows as long as I have the high highs. But if I get none of it and I'm just existing, that's not what this is about. That this experience of breathing cannot be about being that numb. And that was the problem that I had with lithium. That's why I didn't want to get on it. Is I recognize that the more we were progressing with SSRIs, the less of the person that I am. And I might be manic, I might be a crazy person, I might be a little bit eccentric, but I'm me. I don't want to remove that.
Yeah, there's it's interesting that you mentioned those highs and lows and the more abundant life. The because at least for me, getting the right diagnosis was pretty important. So like I've had similar experiences with SSRIs. They didn't help me, but they were trying to treat depression. So it made sense. That's what you do when you're treating depression. But but it turns out like my main condition is bipolar disorder, and bipolar disorder has depression as a component of it. So there's depression and mania. That's the two stages of bipolar disorder. But it's the way that you treat bipolar disorder is very different than the way you treat um, uh, depression. So just since I mentioned it, I'll kind of describe how bipolar disorder works for me at least. So I always think of it as like you know what a bobby pin is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a bobby pin, people put it in their hair, or whatever. Well, if you look at a bobby pin from the side, it's like a big U, a really long U. But on one side of it, it's got like these wavy tips.
Yep.
And then at the very end, it's got a piece that comes up, right? So if you imagine, put that end on the top, if you imagine everything on the top being positive emotions, happiness, and everything on the bottom being negative emotions, sadness. The way that most people's emotional states work is if you're on the top, you're happy, something happens and you move a little, you're less happy, and then you're a little bit less happy. Then maybe you'll go around the curve and you'll be a little bit sad, and then you'll come back up, you'll be happy again. But you're moving along the long axis of the bobby pin in terms of emotions. Your emotions have they happen at a rate. With bipolar disorder, you go from the top to the bottom like that.
Without needing to travel.
You don't travel, you go
Yeah.
straight down. So and the higher you are on those little zigzags, the higher you are, the lower you go.
Yeah.
So
The
you'll
harder the drop hits.
Yeah, so I mean, you might even, recognize this from some of my past where, you'll be going along and you're like, oh man, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to do this. And I've got all this energy and I'm so focused and everything is going wonderful. And then all of a sudden, everything falls apart. And that catastrophizing isn't a mental process, it's an emotional reality. You go from very, very high to very, very low. And then the other piece of it is you don't just go from very, very high to very, very low. There's not everybody who has bipolar does this, but there's a process called rapid cycling where you go high and low, high and low, high and low. And it's not like 10 times in the same day, but it's like maybe 3 times in a 2-week period. And the weird thing about bipolar is most people recognize bipolar as someone being manic, but the most common state of being for a person who's bipolar is depression. So depression is your normal. So what people would think of, I mean, what would be tested as? You could go to a therapist and take one of the personality profile exam, and you would test as being depressed, and that's your normal state. That's just how you live. And then you go from depression into mania, and then from mania back to depression. But there's never that side of the bobby pin that's normal happiness, normal sadness. You never lived there. You never lived there.
Yeah, it's
So
almost like being in a happy state is not your default operation, and all of a sudden you just return to default.
Yeah, yeah. So there's and so the medications that I take are mood stabilizers. They're not traditional SSRIs. They're and what they're designed to do is to prevent me from going to that side of the bobby pin that has the little wigglies on it, because because um that's these rapid changes of emotions and mood. Um, uh, and they bring you down into this into the other side of the bobby pin, which is where most people live at normally. So with there's so and I've said to my psychiatrist several times, I'm like, man, maybe we should stop taking this one, because I would be thinking of a side effect, and I'm like, maybe we should stop taking this one because that might uh, that might make this side effect go away. She's like, no, I don't think we want to take that one off, because that's one of the ones that's keeping you uh, in that realm of normality.
Okay.
Um, and so for me, if they were treating me just for my depression, um, they'd be treating the wrong thing. Uh, there's and 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 I think that's the case. I mean, it's like uh, you know. Well, anyway, that's just been my experience. So I think that part of getting the right medication is getting the right diagnosis, because it's very different. Somebody who's got I mentioned body dysmorphic disorder earlier. Somebody who's got that is treated very differently. I mean, it's like, okay, well, this person is depressed, but the depression is is caused by this other thing, and body dysmorphic disorder. Now, that may be a conventional chronic depression presentation, but somebody who's schizophrenic or bipolar, they're going to have the depressive symptoms just same way that any person that was chronically depressed for any reason would. But that depression isn't a abnormal state. That's the normal state. That's where you live in that basement level of not anxiety, but there's my experience with the way I describe it is, for me, depression isn't sadness, it's numbness. I don't have the capacity to feel anger or joy or love or hate. I just I just am numb. And
See, and that depression was never numbness for me. It was the absence of joy. And it's every other emotion was there: fear, anxiety, anger. It was just the inability to find joy in anything. And that's one of the things that people talk about that is so hard, is you just gotta do things that make you happy. And when you have no ability to like see joy, oh, nothing makes me happy. So what am I gonna go do? But no, I can see a similarity of the numbness though.
yeah, and that's why so many times, for people that have bipolar disorder, they want to be manic, and the reason they want to be manic is because that's the only time you feel anything. There, so
Yeah.
you feel all these things, and they're overwhelming, and you've got just ideas, and I could do anything, and you're just pumped with all this uncontrollable energy. But but the only other state that you're in is feeling nothing. So you either go from feeling nothing about anything to feeling everything about everything.
Yeah. And that's how you get to catastrophizing again.
Yeah, yeah,
Because you're feeling everything and you're like, this is a terrible thing.
yeah.
Uh,
And like when you're manic, you're like you want to keep you want to ride that. So like you stay up for days. You throw your entire being into working on a project or whatever it is, um, because you never want that manic feeling to go away. Because when the manic feeling goes away, all the feelings go away.
right, right. Um, I think that this is probably a good stopping point for us because we've been talking for a couple of hours now, and as much as I am enjoying this conversation, I've been getting no sleep the last couple of nights, and I am struggling after being at a protest all day on top of getting like 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. So I think we will reconvene next week with the next episode of Supper Talk.
Okie
So
doke.
for those of you who have enjoyed our conversations, we appreciate you listening. If this is your first time and you haven't yet, please subscribe to us on Spotify or YouTube. That would be a huge help. If you want to hear us talk about something specific, we would love to see some comments either on either of those platforms, to be honest. And I appreciate you guys listening to us. Dad, I'll talk to you next week.
Yep. Y'all take care. See ya.
All right. See you guys.